Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and foundational time, the 8th century in Japan.
That's right, the Tenpyō era, with the capital at Hajikyu, a period of incredible change and development.
Exactly. We'll be exploring how Japan started, defining itself through its earliest written histories.
And the explosion in learning and the arts that happened then, it's quite remarkable.
Plus, the rise of state-sponsored Buddhism, a huge influence in how that played out, even for ordinary people.
How did common folks interact with these big temples and shrines? That's a key part of the story, too.
So think of this as your essential guide to understanding the groundwork laid in this really vibrant century.
It's interesting, isn't it, how all these things connect? Defining a past, culture blooming, state religion.
They weren't separate threads at all.
No, not really. It was all part of this intense period of, well, nation building, you could say. Everything fed into that central goal.
Okay, let's start with that idea of establishing national identity. You mentioned the ruling class getting really interested in history and geography. Why then?
Well, if you think about the Ritsuru state, they were building this whole system of laws and administration.
Right, the centralized government.
Yeah. To make that work, you needed a shared story, a common understanding of where the nation came from and what it looked like. It wasn't just trivia, it was about legitimacy.
Ah, so it shores up their authority.
Precisely. And that's likely why we see these foundational texts being created. First, the Kojiki.
Completed around 712.
Yes, under Empress Genmai, it drew on older traditions, oral recitations.
Keirei no R,
Okay.
based on Emperor Tenmu's earlier orders.
Exactly. Compiled by Ono Yasumaro, think of it as the records of ancient matters, really focused on tracing the imperial line back to mythology.
So providing that divine justification for rule.
A very powerful narrative, yes. Then, just a bit later, in 720, you get the Nihon Shoki.
The Chronicles of Japan. How was that different?
It was more deliberately modeled after Chinese official histories. Prince Tonri was key here.
So more structured.
Right.
Maybe more political.
Probably. It served as the official national history, presenting the past in a way that fit the state's needs. Still crucial, but maybe a different flavor than the Kojiki.
Okay, so they have these big national stories. But what about, like, the regions, the provinces?
Good question. How does a central power rule a diverse land? That's where the 713 imperial order comes in.
The one asking provinces to record local stuff.
Exactly. Local products, origins of place names, folklore, the things that made each region unique.
And that resulted in the Fudoki.
The records of wind and earth? Yes. Sadly, only 5 complete ones survive from Hitachi, Harima, Izumo, Bungo, and Hizen.
Still, those must be invaluable.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
They give us these fantastic snapshots of regional life, beliefs, local legends. It shows they weren't just focused on the grand narrative. They wanted to understand the parts, too.
That paints a much richer picture. Okay, let's shift to learning and the arts. It feels like more than just statecraft was happening.
Definitely a cultural blossoming. Look at the establishment of schools, the Daigaku in the capital.
The grand school.
And the Kokugaku provincial schools. Now, they were mainly for the kids of nobles and powerful families.
Educating the future administrators.
Right. Focusing on Confucian classics, which were seen as, well, essential for good governance. Instruction was key.
And this learning environment fueled literature, too. We see names like Umi no Mifune and Ishigami no Yakatsugu.
Yes, notable figures in prose and poetry. And you also get the Kaifusu.
An anthology of Chinese-style poems.
Right. It shows how strong that continental influence still was. The aristocracy was very engaged with Chinese culture.
But it wasn't just imitation, was it? A distinct Japanese voice was emerging.
Absolutely. You see the rise of really important waka poets. People like Yamanue no Okura.
His poems often seem quite personal, reflecting on life's hardships.
Yes, sometimes focusing on ordinary people. Then there's Yamabe no Akihito, known for his beautiful nature poems, and Shitomo no Yakamochi, a major figure also involved in politics.
And towering over it all, the Manishu.
Ah, the collection of 10,000 leaves. Monumental.
Well, what makes it so special beyond its size?
Well, crucially, it's not just court poetry. You have ancient songs, poems by emperors, aristocrats, but also poems by common people.
Like the Sakamori no Uta, songs of the frontier guards.
Exactly. These incredibly poignant poems about hardship, longing for home, voices you wouldn't normally hear.
It's amazing to have that range.
It really is. It gives you such a broad view of society politics, daily life, emotions across the spectrum, an indispensable source for understanding the 7th and 8th centuries.
Okay, let's move to state Buddhism. This seems like a defining feature of the Tenpyō era. Tudaiji, the Kokubunji.
Huge undertakings. The construction under Emperor Shumu was immense.
What was the driving force? Just piety?
It was likely complex. Certainly praying for peace and national unity was part of it, establishing these temples in every province.
The Kokubunji.
Yes, that visually and symbolically projected imperial power and a unified Buddhist doctrine across the land, spiritual and political authority.
And Nara itself became a major center for Buddhist thought. The 6 Nara schools.
The Nantoro Kushu, yes. Sanron, Jujitsu, Hosho, Kusha, Kigan, Ritsu, each focused on different philosophical aspects. It was a real flourishing of Buddhist scholarship.
Fueled by monks going to China.
And monks coming from abroad, like Ganjin, hugely influential. He brought the Ritsu school focusing on monastic discipline, the rules, the precepts, and founded Tushudaiji. Proper instruction in the faith was important.
And certain scriptures were key to this state Buddhism.
Definitely. The Konchimi Saishishiki, the Golden Light Sutra, emphasized the ruler's role in upholding Buddhist law for the realm's benefit.
Protection, basically.
And the Kigankyu, the Flower Garland Sutra, offered this vast, interconnected view of the universe. You can see how that could symbolically link to the emperor at the center of things.
Which brings us to the Daibutsu at Tudaiji.
The Great Buddha, the ultimate symbol of this Kigon-influenced, state-sponsored Buddhism. Its scale was meant to impress.
The original hall was enormous, wasn't it? Something like 88 by 47 meters.
Unbelievably big. We only have glimpses, like that early 12th century painting from the Shikizan Engi Imaki, because the original burned down later. The current one's an 18th century reconstruction.
Wow. So under this state system, what were monks and nuns actually doing? Were they out preaching to everyone?
Generally, no. Their main job was holding services and prayers for the state, for the imperial family. Building private chapels or proselytizing directly to commoners was usually prohibited.
The focus was very much top-down.
It seems so. State protection through prayer and ritual.
Well, you mentioned exceptions. Couldn't
Yeah, Kyuji. He's fascinating. He operated somewhat outside these strict rules.
How so?
He was known for getting involved in social projects, building irrigation, bridges, things that directly helped ordinary farmers. And while doing that, he was spreading Buddhist teachings.
A more grassroots approach.
Exactly. And clearly very popular.
Which leads to the broader question.
Hmm?
How did regular people connect with temples and shrines? Was access easy?
Not always, especially early on.
Yeah.
Take Ai's Grand Shrine.
The imperial ancestral shrine.
Right. Hugely important, highest national deity. Only the emperor could make offerings there. Commoners making private offerings. Forbidden. Shihei Kindan.
Wow, strict.
It highlights that tight link between imperial power and religious authority.
And even Tudaiji, you said Emperor Shumu encouraged people to help build it.
Yes, even a handful of earth, he supposedly said. But reports suggest that once it was finished, commoners were actually barred from visiting.
So, built with popular contribution, but then restricted.
It seems that way initially, emphasizing its role as a state institution first and foremost.
But things changed over time. Popular demand led to new shrines.
Yes, especially during hard times, famine, plagues. People needed solace, leading to new local shrines reflecting their immediate concerns.
And the relationship with the big temples shifted too.
Definitely. Later on, especially by the late Heian period, the imperial court couldn't always fund reconstructions after fires, for example.
Like the Great Buddha needing rebuilding.
Exactly. So temples started relying more on donations from ordinary people. This naturally created a closer connection.
And that's where groups like the Oshi at Ice come in.
Right. They actively promoted and guided pilgrimages for commoners. They were like intermediaries, helping spread Ai's worship far and wide.
Which eventually led to those huge mass pilgrimages later on.
Yes, culminating in things like the Okejimeri in the Edo period. A long evolution from those early restrictions.
Let's talk about Tenpyō art. We've got the architecture, Tudaiji's Kondu, Tudaiji's Hokkaido, the Shushin. What defines the art?
Grandeur is one word. And a very strong Tang Chinese influence. You really see that cosmopolitan connection.
And sculpture techniques were advancing beyond bronze.
Oh, yes. Shuj, clay sculpture, really took off. And kanshitsu's, the dry lacquer technique, was new and important.
We still have examples, right? The clay Nikko and Gakko Bosatsu statues.
In the Hokkaido at Tudaiji, yes. And the powerful clay shitenno, the four heavenly kings at the Kaiden, they have this amazing realism and expressive quality.
And for dry lacquer,
Yeah.
the Fukukenjaku cannon.
A masterpiece, also in the Hokkaido. And the 8 guardians at Kufukuji, full of energy. Kanshitsu allowed for lighter figures, often hollow, with fine details.
Like the statue of Ganjin himself at Chuchidaiji.
A very famous Kanshitsu zuj. It's incredibly moving, capturing his perseverance despite the hardships, losing his sight.
You can really feel the reverence in it.
Absolutely. It embodies his spirit.
Then there's that painting on hemcloth, the Kishushin at Yakushiji. She looks almost like a court lady.
She does, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Especially without her usual attributes. A goddess of fortune, but depicted with this almost secular elegance, very Tang-style court fashion.
What does that tell us?
It suggests a kind of blending of the sacred and the worldly, reflecting the sophisticated court culture and its influence even on religious art.
And finally, the Shushin repository. We have to mention that.
The Shushin, an absolute treasure trove. Basically, Emperor Shimu's personal collection, plus court items, medicines.
What's so amazing about it?
Its sheer range, items from Tang China, of course, but also goods traded through Tang from much further afield. India, Persia, Arabia, Southeast Asia.
Wow, like a time capsule of the Silk Road.
In a way, yes. Plus Japanese-made items imitating those foreign styles. Incredible craftsmanship.
You mentioned specific things like a white glass bowl.
A hakururi one, yes. And a silver incense burner, kunkunro. A dark blue glass cup, konrure. A fragment of hunting scene brocade. A lacquered ewer.
What does owning things like that say about Tempe society?
It speaks volumes about their international connections, their wealth, their sophisticated tastes, and the high level of artistry they achieved.
You touched on the evolution of sculpture techniques earlier, from
Right.
bronze.
Right. Early on, bronze casting, konduzu, using lost wax was common. The great Buddha itself was cast in stages.
Then clay things became popular.
Yes, using a core and building up with clay. And dry lacquer, kanshitsu, building layers over a form, often removing the core later.
Lighter, more detailed maybe.
Yeah, often, yes. Then later, in the Kunyan and Jugen periods, wood sculpture dominates, especially ichibokuzukuri, carving from a single block.
And finally, Yosigizukuri.
Joined wood carving, yes, became big in the late Heian period, carving parts separately and assembling them. Allowed for bigger statues, maybe faster production too, as demand grew.
So wrapping up our deep dive into the Tenpyō era, it feels like we've seen Japan really start to forge its identity.
Definitely. Through those historical narratives, the Kuchiti, Nihon Shoki, Fudoki.
And experience this amazing cultural flourishing in arts, poetry, learning.
Absolutely. And deeply integrated Buddhism into the state structure, leaving these incredible monuments like Chudaiji and the Daibutsu.
While also seeing the beginnings of how ordinary people engaged with religion, a relationship that kept evolving.
It's truly striking how these threads, politics, culture, religion, society, were all interwoven in the 8th century. It really laid the foundation for so much that came after in Japanese history.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Considering how deliberately they documented their land and history back then, how did that early focus on record-keeping shape Japan's sense of self later on, especially when interacting with other cultures?
That's a great question. And what about the lasting impact of Tenpyō art and Buddhism? Can you still see echoes of it in Japan's cultural landscape today? Definitely something to think about.